Uh, okay, there we go. Folks are coming back. So, Commissioner, I think we're ready to roll.
Morning, everybody, and welcome to the December 11th public meeting of the Colorado State Land Board. We are having a short public meeting today, followed by our annual lunch where we recognize our lessees and partners and also our staff for the hard work and the accomplishments throughout the year. And from at this point, since there's not executive session, we'll roll into the regular agenda, which entails acknowledging that we've had some public comments from two individuals. Oh, right. Okay, to ensure we have a quorum and that everybody's going to be at the holiday lunch. May we call roll? Commissioner Chavez?
Here.
Commissioner Bloom. I've had a morning.
I'm Commissioner.
Commissioner. Mr. Clark. No, I got that here. Mr. Scanlon. Here. Okay. And I'm here, so that makes a quorum. Thank you. And I'd like to acknowledge the public comments from two individuals and suggest that actually these are good comments, and I would suggest that the staff follow up with each of the individuals.
That's Andy, I think one of them's you, wherever you are, listening at home, and David Rodenberg, Scott, the other, which is concerning a right of way or proposed right of way.
Right away. So thank you in advance, staff, for following up on this.
You want to open it up to anybody listening along?
Yes.
Folks listening along online, if you'd like to address the board with a comment on an item that's not on our agenda today, this is the time to do that. Please use the raise hand button on your viewer and we'll bring you up so that you can speak to the board. Got a hand raised from Derek Michael. Moving Derek to panelist.
Yeah.
Derek, you're in control of your mic and camera when you're ready.
There we go. Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Can you
Yes.
hear us?
There we go. Hello.
Now we can hear and see you.
Oh, perfect. All right. Well, first of all, I appreciate your time. Name's Derek Mickle. I work with the Bureau of Reclamation. We are on one of those permits you were discussing, or right-of-ways there, with David Rosenbaum. So yeah, we were just wanting to have a real quick little bit of your time here to discuss the ABC project, if at all possible, and kind of that's the Arkansas Valley Conduit, southeastern Colorado, and we are going to be crossing a couple of state trust land parcels down there, and we just wanted the opportunity. I know this isn't necessarily probably the best forum to get the right people in the room to kind of discuss our future reaches, because we currently are under construction on a couple, and the design process will be coming up here soon for these reaches that may impact some of the state trust land. And it's kind of we're trying to get our designs out in front and understand our alignment a little bit, so that we can, if we need to, adjust or make different priorities. So we understand that in our discussions with the DNR staff that you guys normally do a 30-year term for state trust land. And we were just wanting to kind of understand that process and understand if there was any kind of deviations that were going to be possible with such a large publicly facing federal project in the $1.4 billion range. If there is going to be able to do a deviation on that or not. So we would just like the opportunity to get the right people in the room and present to to work on that. So that was just all my comment was, and thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Michael, I'm happy to work with you with David Rodenberg, but that is our standard right-of-way term. I think the way to best approach this board is for us to actually have an application from you. So there's a matter that's ripe for them to consider. Because we don't have an application yet. And so happy to work with you on that, and we'll make a recommendation to our board. And if you want something different, you are welcome to come before the board when the matter is in front of them for a vote.
Understood. And that application process, is that something that, because this will be, further down in the future, right? It's kind of Only Springs, Otero, and Bent county line timeframe. So we're looking a couple of years out, and our worry is, so we're trying to get in front of this, right, to make sure we can actually design our alignment correctly. So our worry is that as we get ahead of this, getting our right of ways in place, it's really hard for the federal government to say, with such a large infrastructure project, that we're only going to have a potential of 30 years on this easement when we're investing a lot of money. And so is that application process, can we start that now, even though we're years in the making? Or
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
So I'm happy to work with you and David Rodenberg on that.
Awesome. No, thank you for your time.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else out there listening along? If you wanted to make that comment on an item not on the agenda, raise your hand. No additional hands.
All right, then. Why don't we turn it over to Director Ryan for any announcements, if you have any?
Nothing that I won't cover in staff report.
Right. And Mr. Brass, would you like to update us? No?
We're gonna have Kelly.
All right, Kelly.
Kelly, the new Mr.
Delighted to
Brass.
meet you, and thanks for introducing yourself.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, so I'm not Mr. Brass. I'm Kelly Romero, the Deputy Policy Director for DNR, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all again today. I think the last time I had the opportunity to meet with you was in Steamboat, my hometown, and it was such a great opportunity to be in the field on the Williams Fork parcel with you all. So hopefully I get invited back for those field trip meetings. I like those ones. I just wanted to provide some updates on what's happening at the Department of Natural Resources these days. It's my understanding at your last meeting, I think Aaron Ray, our Assistant Director of Energy, was here and provided updates on DNR's legislative and budget priorities. So I'm not going to run through those again today, but please, if you have questions, let me know. Happy to answer those, but we're definitely gearing up for the start of the legislative session, January 8th. It's fast approaching. And our legislative director, Daphne Gervais, is working really hard securing bill sponsors, and we're beginning to stake hold a lot of our bills, and wish us luck. Today we go before the JBC, the Joint Budget Committee, to answer questions regarding DNR's budget. So it's going to be a big day. Also, just wanted to offer a few updates on federal policy. As we're facing a change in administration, this administration is trying to get a lot of things done within the next month and a half. A few things that we're tracking are the utility scale solar PEIS record of decision. So we're anticipating that that'll be finalized before the end of the year. And then the BLM state office expects that the Greater Sage Grouse RMPA record of decision will be signed by Colorado, but it remains to be seen if the other states, Wyoming and Idaho and Utah, will also agree to it. It could result in some legal complications if that new plan isn't implemented. And then it'll revert back to the 2015 Greater Sage Grouse plan if not. And then BLM is waiting to publish the draft EIS on Compadre Field Office RMPA until after the change in the federal administration. We are also tracking some key pieces of federal legislation during the lame duck session. I am happy to announce that yesterday, after what, 2.5, almost 3 decades, Congress passed the Good Samaritan Remediation Abandoned Hard Rock Mines Act. This is a bill that's been, in the works, debated and failed, finally made it through the House yesterday. So this will enable some liability protection for folks that want to touch some of these polluting abandoned mine tailings and whatnot. So we're hopeful that this could really spur the cleanup of Colorado's watersheds. So exciting. All other bills that we're tracking: the Upper Colorado River and San Juan River Basin Endangered Fish Recovery Program Reauthorization Act. This is critical to Colorado because it provides Endangered Species Act coverage for 1,500 water projects in Colorado alone. And as your water resources manager over here can attest, that's critical to anybody that has a water project or owns a water right of diversion within the Colorado River Basin. So we're really hoping that actually will end up getting attached to the NDAA. And moving on to energy, as DNR is playing a role along with State Land Board and facilitating a smooth energy transition. A few highlights: ECMC, the Energy Carbon Management Commission, is likely to complete their Class 6 rulemaking this week. And those rules, once adopted, will form the basis for the state's primacy application to the US EPA. And we expect that application to be submitted in early 2025. ECMC's ended up rescheduling the produced water rulemaking until, I believe, later in January, actually January 30th through the first week of February. ECMC's docket has been pretty full, so they decided to go ahead and move that to next month. And on November 27th, ECMC released 2 statutory required reports. The first focused on pipeline safety and was co-authorized with the PUC. And then the second was focused on considerations related to Colorado pursuing primacy for underground injection programs. The state currently has primacy for in Class 2 wells and is pursuing primacy for Class 4. ECMC also, along with the Division of Water Resources, are also working on another statutorily required study. And this one will be focused on opportunities to further geothermal development in Colorado. The recommendations that we anticipate will come out of that report are also informing DNR's legislative priority around geothermal, which of course we're beginning to stake hold now. Moving on to forest health, as DNR really seeks to advance climate resiliency in Colorado, our COSWAP program. I think if y'all are familiar with that one, it's will be making its final decisions for the 3rd round of its workforce development release this week, December 9th. And there are 2 projects that are on State Land Board land for a total request of 16 weeks of Youth Corps week. So really appreciate the State Land Board being a part of the COSWAP program, which of course, if you're not familiar with, is really focused on forest health, wildfire mitigation projects, and certainly workforce development. And then also the Forest Health Council is working on its 30-year vision for forest health in Colorado. And I believe your staff, Mindy Gotzigan, has been engaged and informed on that. So really excited to work with your team as we advance that 30-year vision for our forests. Moving on to what DNR is working on with respect to advancing biodiversity and balancing conservation and recreation. At November, at the Parks and Wildlife Commission meeting in November, the commission unanimously approved the East Slope Mountain Lion study, and that's going to guide a science-based management of mountain lions in the coming years. approval of the plan had been put on hold until the outcome of Proposition 127 was known. Since that failed, they moved forward. And so more to come there. And then additionally, the commission approved a new set of regulations which will govern commercial use on state parks and wildlife areas. These new regulations will help CPW to better balance conservation and recreation, while also providing consistency on how commercial use is regulated across parks and wildlife properties. And then additionally, CPW has wrapped up comments on their draft species of greatest conservation need, which will guide management of and restoration of sensitive wildlife species through the updated State Wildlife Action Plan, which will be updated next year. Moving on to climate resiliency and the role that water plays in that. A couple things. This isn't necessarily just in DNR's court, but the CDPHE has been running stakeholder engagement for its new dredge and fill rule regulations. You remember there was a bill that passed last year to enable that program. The Water Quality Control Division is leading that effort, and this is really in response to the Supreme Court decision regarding waters of the U.S. and what is or what does or does not fall under federal jurisdiction. So the state is really trying to fill that gap to help protect Colorado's water bodies. The comments on the dredge and fill regulation 87 are due on January 12th. Additionally, there's a lot going on in the Colorado River. All you have to do is not even look past the front page of of the Denver Post or the New York Times or any other news story, newspaper. So things are still in full swing. Late November, the Bureau of Reclamation released their matrix of alternatives for post-2026 alternatives, which will guide and determine how Lakes Calamite will be operated. They're not required, they weren't required under NEPA to conduct this step, but their intent was that by releasing these options, they could help prompt further negotiations between the states. I'll just note Commissioner Mitchell, our representative from Colorado, she's continuing to try to get folks to the table to negotiate, but it's definitely, we're at a real tense moment with respect to Colorado River negotiations, and it has huge implications for, as you all know, the entire Southwest. And then also related to Colorado River, the Bureau of Reclamation had released the Bucket 2E IRA funds that those grants were due back in November. We're really hoping that the Bureau of Reclamation will be able to move quickly to get those grants awarded. There's quite a bit of money for drought resiliency projects in the upper Colorado River Basin, and a lot of projects that could benefit particularly the west slope of Colorado. So we're hoping those awards happen quickly so that the future of those IRA funds are secure. And then also I just want to give a quick update on what DNR has been working on with respect to tribal engagement. We've wrapped up our initial consultation meetings with the Southern Ute and Ute Mountain Ute Indian tribes and with their leadership on our legislative proposal to provide free entry for all Colorado state parks for Southern Ute and Ute Mountain Ute members, tribal members. And then additionally, we've got tribal engagement with Southern Ute and Ute Mountain Ute on the CPW State Wildlife Action Plan, so that's ongoing. And then finally, we're continuing to develop our tribal engagement guidance framework for the Colorado Outdoor Strategy, which I believe you all have had presentations on from Kim Brest. And so that's is nearly completion and will be ready for public comment in the spring. So I know that's a lot, kind of all over the place. Yes.
Can I ask a clarifying question
Yeah,
on
of
your
course.
last comment? I think I just heard you say the Colorado Outdoor Strategy Plan is getting ready for public comment and will come out in the spring. And thought it had maybe already been through public comment. Did I
Yeah,
misunderstand that?
yeah, and I actually probably ran through it too quickly. So this would just be the tribal engagement guidance framework component of that, but you're correct. Yeah.
And so the idea is for the plan to get finalized and out in the spring.
Well, I have to apologize. I don't know the exact date when we're going to complete the Colorado Outdoor strategy and release it, but coming up here in the next couple months, I think
Okay.
this is like an additional component to it,
Okay,
like a companion to the Colorado Outdoor strategy. If that makes
Thank you.
sense.
got it.
Questions? Thank you very much. You're a little
Yeah.
busy.
Yeah.
The idea you had time to do all that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I didn't even mention Will.
Yeah, I wonder
Yeah,
why.
That can take a while. Anyway, I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Director Ryan, would you like to give us the
Staff
highlights?
report, I'd love to. You all tab one of your books. As I've been doing recently, I want to remind you that you have authorized staff to take a whole lot of actions. So staff took 77 lease actions this month within the authority you granted us. I think I would highlight the last 30 days since we last spoke as one dedicated to HR and recruiting. We've got Kristen Kemp's position. We've done interviews there. We've got a couple of finalists that we're doing reference checking on now, but we had some great candidates for that. So I'm certain we will end up with a PIO here, and we're hoping to have an offer made maybe as early as next week. So that would be great. We also got 2 new FTEs in the last legislative session. Well, we got several, but 2 that we've been focused on interviewing for, the biodiversity manager and the regenerative agriculture manager. Both of those searches have closed. We've got groups here that are going through all those applications and starting the interview process. We've added a technician role. We had Aaron Hurlber left to go to Urban Land Conservancy.
Oh, I knew they got
We got
another
coached.
Aaron, and I
Yes.
was like, I swore we agreed on a moratorium on errands at ULC.
I said the same thing to the other 3 errands over there.
Confusing over there.
Anyway, we wish him well. It's a great opportunity for him, and he's going. So we're working to replace him here as well. So a lot of people and a lot of time spent on recruiting over the last 30 days. Let's see. Well, maybe the easiest thing for me to do is ask you if you have any questions or about any of the rest of the stuff in here.
I just had a couple questions on the leasing. I always like going through this. On the bankruptcy, looked like a lot of acres. Do we get stuck with any non-payments or?
I'm gonna throw my lifeline to Andy. And I don't see Andy.
I think he's muting or moving kids around.
Yeah, it was just,
We can get back to you.
yeah,
We
that's
will
what-
get with you before the day is out to answer those.
And then I just wanted to, on the one lease that was enrolled in CRP, Grassland CRP for the next 10 years. We've talked about that before. Do we split some of that revenue with them? Because it's usually above and beyond what our leases are. And then I just wanted to clarify that once this has been done, their section 118 rights are lost.
Not with Grassland CRP.
Okay. Any other CRP ones, or that's what okay. Well, I'm glad I asked.
That is a 50-50 split. This is William
Okay.
Wilson Field Operations.
Thank you. That's perfect.
It's 50-50 split.
But are any 118 rights lost when on other CRPs?
CRP did, because that was well, I wasn't there when that was created, but my assumption is that was because it was essentially a cessation of production on the land, if you will. But to me, with the Grassland CRP, that's a continuation of their management on that land through that contract.
Makes sense. Perfect. Thank you. That was it.
Thank you for those. All right. And how about we move to, say, oh, yeah.
Yep, land life, forest,
Yep.
carbon. And min-
Exciting.
Somewhere you were going.
Yes, that's where I was going. Right there. More creative ecosystem, revenue generation.
Get my water, sorry. Might do this. Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Mindy Godsagan, the Conservation Services Manager for the State Land Board. And I'm here today to present an information item on a proposed project involving a number of state trust lands throughout the state. My presentation will consist of a couple of parts, and I'm going to be asking you a number of questions or feedback on some of the issues. My presentation will be followed by a short presentation of about 10 minutes from Land Life as well. So feel free to ask me questions through the presentation. I do have a summary slide at the end of listing those 4 issues, but we'll pause also to have the presentation come along. So, am I in control of this now?
Yep, and it's a little sluggish, so just pause between clicks.
I'll hit the enter button on this one. Okay. So this is an information item. I'm bringing this to you at this time because I wanted feedback on some of this issues involved with this proposed project. It will be an ecosystem services production lease. Normally, you've delegated to staff the ability to have a planning lease ahead of time. We're moving with this particular project directly into a production lease, so the intention is that we do so. I'm planning to bring that back to you in about 2 months while we finalize some specifics on particular parts of the property. But Land Life was interested, and I am as well, to get your feedback on a couple of new lease elements or new lease terms that we haven't seen before. Normally, this would have come to you anyway, because anything that's not within the scope of the ecosystem services leasing policy, we would have to bring to you. But this particular issue is being brought to you now because of a critical time in this project of needing to order tree seedlings pretty much now. And so we want to get kind of take the board's temperature on some of these leasing concepts or the leasing terms and get some feedback before we move forward. That said,
I just one quick question. You said it's new to us, but is it new to the state or our country? These programs?
it's on the leading edge. Yeah, there have been projects of this sort in Colorado. Land Life is an international company, worked in other countries, including several states in North America. This is kind of new on state lands and state trust lands. Oh, sorry. So this project is really all about restoring burned forest state trust land and generating revenue. In fact, I'll call your attention to the top of the cover sheet, where really the 2 goals that we're really looking at is not just income generation in terms of new revenue, but to be entrepreneurial in the pursuit of non-extractive or new lines of business. And then also one of the things about ecosystem services leasing or ecosystem service leases that they're always this juncture point of improving stewardship and generating revenue. And so this project would come to you as an ecosystem services lease. I wanted to call your attention to this picture in this slide. This is a photograph of our 4-mile state wildlife area property in southern Douglas County. This property was burned in the 2002 Hayman fire. And you can see it's our only property that we have in that Hayman burn area. And I wanted to show you a close-up of this from that same site. In the distance, you can see kind of a tilted land and some trees growing on that. There's certainly a riparian area in the foreground that's mostly aspen. That forested area in the back is actually Forest Service land that juts out into state trust land, which is in the foreground and then off to the right. Our land is not reforested, has not reforested itself, except for the aspen area. That land in the back was planted by the U.S. Forest Service with 1 or 2 years within, like after the fire. That land has those trees are now 20 years old, and we have not seen regeneration on our land, except for very few sites that were planted by Boy Scouts in a project a few years after the fire. They planted a couple of clusters, maybe 300 or 400 trees at most. And then actually a few years ago, the Nature Conservancy had some extra trees that they needed to get in the ground. And we offered this property for them to plant that. So those sites, you wouldn't ever be able to see them in this photograph, but that involved about 60 acres on our property and about 4,200 trees planted. But my point is here is that our property did not regenerate. Whereas you can see those trees in the distance are probably anywhere from 5 to 10 or 12 feet tall at this point. And that I wanted to bring your attention to this because we're going to be talking about our opportunity, our decision to whether or not we pursue reforestation on some of our state trust lands. And I'll just point out that, well, I'll talk a little bit about that later. But okay, so the 5 properties that I'm presenting to you today, just as an information item, are scattered throughout the state, mostly in the central part of the state in our mountain areas. They altogether, the burned areas on these and it's not even the burned areas, but just the plantable areas would represent about 1,000 acres. That's the ideal project size that Land Life would like. It may be a little bit more or less than that, but for economies of scale, we really are looking for more than just one property or two. These involve the Silver Mountain Project of a property in Huerfano County in southern Colorado, the Milk Creek property in Grand County, and then both of those first 2 properties are larger properties, mountain properties, and then the last 3 up in Larimer County are all single they're all single sections of 640 acres. And these are the 4 items that I'd like feedback from you on. This project, if it goes forward, would involve a 40-year required lease term. That lease term is specified by the Carbon Registry, Verra. So it's beyond what we normally see, certainly with an ecosystem services lease, but also on the outside of what the board normally approves. I'm going to talk a little bit about site selection. One of the biggest issues involved with this project is the impact on grazing. Generally speaking, what we want to see is a restriction on grazing on the planting areas. The seeds that are planted, the seedlings that are planted are usually 8 to 10 inches tall. They're very susceptible to early browsing for about 8 to 10 years. So we're looking at how that, if it's necessary, how grazing would be restricted on just the planting sites. And then we have some early indicators of what some of those lease terms would be. We're looking at about an $87,000 lease payment in year 1. That would be split between 2 payments, probably between one at lease signing and the other one, with the other half upon completion of planting. That also would involve at least about $1 million investment on our lands from private investment through the voluntary forest carbon market. The project starting in year 41 would be an opportunity for our board to own those carbon credits going forward, if the board decides to continue the project. And then also the project would contribute toward the state's greenhouse gas goals for nature-based carbon sequestration. Are there any questions on this at this time? Okay. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of the project's phases. This information is in your cover sheet. This chart here shows there's kind of 3 broad phases of the project. One at pre-planting and planting. These both phases can occur within the very first year. And then post-planting, once the trees, there's the seedlings in the ground, we're looking at least a minimum of a 40-year period. And most of the activity is going to happen right at the beginning. And so here are those 3 phases. This next chart kind of lays out some of the actual tasks that happen in year 0 to 1, with the critical part being, planting is actually executed. The reason I'm bringing this to you today is because we're at that point. I think I mentioned that Land Life, in order to have seedlings that are a year old a year from now to plant, we're really looking at, they're looking at making that decision soon. You've heard the phrase, what's the perfect time to plant a tree? On one hand, a really great time to plant is in the fall, when you're going to be taking advantage of lower temperatures and winter moisture to get the tree settled and root started. But You've heard this saying, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago.
Hmm.
The second best time is this year. If we don't work quickly, well, we have the opportunity to work quickly so that planting could occur in fall of 2025. If this is delayed much beyond the next month or two, we're looking at planting in the fall of 2026.
So, Mindy,
Mhm.
that's a huge amount of planting. How would you propose that to be done?
Well, that would be a question for land life. That's why we lease land and we don't do all this ourselves. So they'll be able to address that, and that's what they have experience doing. So they'll be the project lessee and executing all that on the ground implementation. So I'm not going to go through all of these steps. It's in your board packet if you have any questions, but really we're looking at site due diligence, what makes sense. We looked at not just these 5 properties that were written before you, but at least another 5 that were eliminated. And about 2 or 3 years ago, I visited every property of ours, with the exception of 1 or 2 because of access, but I couldn't get access to all these properties that were burned in wildfires to do some initial assessment. Once planting happens, there is a process of validation recording. This project would be registered on a carbon registry site, and so it needs to meet those high standards. Land Life is proposing to work with Vera, which is one of the highest, one of the carbon registries that has the highest standards internationally. And then after post-planting, we're really looking at continuing verification and monitoring. There are certain years that has to happen. It's generally once every 5 years. And then in years 40 to 100, that process can continue. This proposed project would really only be looking at the first 40 years. And then starting in year 41, the carbon rights would return to the State Land Board. And the board at that time would have the opportunity to decide whether to continue the project or to cease the monitoring and verification. That involves a third party, an independent third party. So it's not Land Life, it's not us, but they're reporting these standards to the carbon registry to make certain that the amount of carbon that continues to be sequestered. This graph shows the rate of sequestration by trees. This is just for the first 40 years. You can see that the rate of sequestration is quite steep at first. The reason there's a drop off at year 20 is that the verification model or the model that's used by Vera stops counting the sequestration for mostly underground or root growth. It's just the way the formula is used to estimate the amount of sequestration that occurs. You can see they continue to sequester carbon, but just not as steep a rate. And again, at year 40 is when, if the land board at that time decides to continue the project, would have the option of doing so. Land Life will be registering the project for a total of 100 years. We wouldn't have to go through the additional cost of that, but we would have to then decide at that point whether it's monetarily feasible or desirable or beneficial for us to take that verification process on. And we would do that by hiring another company. This chart shows the responsibilities of the 3 major participants, the Land Life across the top. Again, using those same project phases of year 0 to 1, the first 2 or 3 years with verification, and then going years 5 through 40 with every 5 years having a monitoring and verification report. The State Land Board's responsibilities are much less than what Land Life will be taking on. We're really just working with site access, working with our lessees, giving information, and providing these updates. And then the State Forest Service at the bottom, as you know, they're a lessee for all of our timber management, for all of our forested lands. We've already met with them once to discuss this project. Land Life has already been working with those district offices in the counties where these properties are located. Their management needs would be very little during this first 40 years, but they would basically be able to be on the ground and collaborating, providing information, and to the degree possible, or to the degree needed, performing management needs For example, up to 20% of the trees could be cut if necessary. And that would all be in collaboration. with as well. Sure.
Excuse me, a question on that. The Colorado State Forest Service, so have they had experience? Have they been looking into this? What's their general, are they excited about the possibility? Do they see this as, this could be a broader, large scale solution to all the burned acres in Colorado? What's their general take on this opportunity?
Well, in our initial meeting with them, they're still learning. Even though reforestation on state trust lands is one of their responsibilities under their 20-year lease agreement with us, in the last 20 or 30 years, they haven't done any reforestation. The Land Life worked closely with the State Forest Service in the Spring Creek Fire area on private land. So as you know, the State Forest Service has one of their major responsibilities is really being advocates and working in close collaboration with private landowners. So I think Land Life can talk a little bit about how they've worked with them in the past. They've also worked with them in Grand County on another project that they're doing. But it's new. I mean, this is new to Colorado. It's new for us. There's a learning curve involved with everyone, but really Land Life is excited to be working with them because of their expertise on Colorado forests. So
a quick follow-up, a little less related. Have you had any conversations with the U.S. Forest Service? I mean, they've tried a lot of different things around the country. Any
no,
feedback?
I don't. I'll punt that question to Land Life. We have not. And I just know that a previous forest carbon lessee, Renew West, that the board had approved planning lease, that lessee ended up canceling the lease. They couldn't make the logistics work. And they didn't have any previous experience, kind of doing this in Colorado. They were unable to work with the state forest, the U.S. Forest Service, because of procedures on the Forest Services side.
Mhm.
So, but one of the opportunities that this working with the State Forest Service with our lessees or anyone that has fee land, Land Life is interested in possibly working with them as well. Because particularly when the land is like immediately adjacent for these five. Any other questions? So this map shows our state land or surface ownership with the major wildfires that have occurred really since 2002. This map, this fire right in the center is the Hayman Fire. And from 2002, when that fire occurred, it was the largest in state history. Since then, we've had some very large other fires that have happened. And I know we haven't seen the end of these. The projects that we're looking at today, this is the Silver Mountain property in Huerfano County, Mill Creek property in Grant County, and then the 3 single sections up in Larimer County. Those burned either in the Cameron Peak Fire or the 2012 High Park Fire. And what I haven't shown us here is the 5 or 6 other properties that Land Life looked at, whether it's already not enough natural regeneration of trees coming back, other vegetation that would preclude the uplift that would be necessary to register this project as a carbon sequestration project.
So just to clarify on that point, then from the perspective of the State Land Board, nothing's happening on these lands and perhaps others that have been burned.
Not enough.
So,
There's some properties that are coming back like gangbusters.
right.
And those would not qualify for a forest carbon project because that's already happening naturally. And with carbon sequestration projects, you need to show something called additionality, what you're doing in addition to what would happen naturally. So properties are already coming back and not like enough on their own would not qualify.
And so put another way, on these properties, if we continue to do nothing, they continue to sit there as the general and are, dirt prone to erosion, prone to all those.
And I wouldn't say that they'll never regenerate, but in the scale of the next few decades, they probably wouldn't have the natural regeneration. You saw what happened on the 4 Mile property. There wasn't any natural kind of regeneration there or very little. There's a lot of ground cover. There are grasses and natural forbs. That's all come back really well. We were lucky to not have very much erosion on our property. Part of it's because it's very flat, but we aren't seeing regeneration of the ponderosas or the lodgepole pine.
Do we know why? I'm just curious.
if
I don't
there's
know,
reason.
you know, there is a lot of natural, smooth brome on that property. That property had been grazed before. I think at the time of the Hayman fire, I don't know if there were horses there, but, we had looked at it before and the Forest Service had recommended that we leave it as an open meadow. But now seeing just what's happening around us and the opportunities for reforestation, it's really nice to see at least some trees planted there.
Were there trees on it before the fire?
There were parts of it that had more than others. And then there were parts that, I think were more pasture land. This chart shows the 5 properties that we're looking at this point. The columns across the top or the titles, it shows the total property acres of that entire property. The second chart, the second column, sorry, shows the percentage of the property or the acres that were burned. So on all the properties, especially the larger ones, in some cases, all of it burned, in some cases it didn't. The reforestation acres, which is the percent of the burned area, even though, for example, the top column or the top row, Silver Mountain, the entire property burned in the 2017 or the 2018 Spring Creek wildfire. But the proposed reforestation acres is about 376 acres. So they're not looking at planting everything that burned. It's about 26% of the burn area. The affected grazing lease is that is actually over 2,000 acres. It includes 2 other sections off the property about 6 and then 12 miles away that never burned at all. And so the project would affect about 18% of the grazing lease. In the case of the Milk Creek property on the second line, it'd be about 1% of their grazing area. The next 2 properties are not leased for grazing at all. And then finally, the Bluestone Park property, that entire section burned as well. We're looking at about, I think 35% of it. It would affect possibly 100% of that grazing lease because of the way that it's situated, but about 18% of all that was leased land. So we're looking at the impact because the first 8 to 10 years, grazing has to be limited. We're very aware of the impact that this would have on lessees. Another important part of that is that all of our grazing leases require that we give our lessees, our grazing lessees, a year's notice before we remove any part of that grazing lease. That means this project, if we gave it today, the project plant could be planned until next December 11th. Lessees can waive that voluntarily. And because grazing or the tree planting is planned so far in the future, at the end of the grazing season, all of the grazing lessees that if we were to do this, they would still have the full grazing or growing period of 2025. And normally these mountain areas, they're pulling the cattle off of those anyway. So we're hoping that the lessees would be willing to waive that last month or 2 of a 12-year notice. Land Life is also interested in the situations where the lessees have their own fee land. It's possible that they could work with those lessees on the fee land as well. And then it really, the site management of grazing will really depend on the site-specific characteristics of each of these 5 properties, where the bird areas are, what their grazing plan is, how they do rotation. Those discussions you're going to be having with individual one-on-one meetings with the 3 grazing lessees in the next month or so. Are there any questions about this slide? Well, let me take you to the next one. And this really shows these 5 properties and the burned area and the proposed planting. So I know it's hard to see on the map on the far left. That's our Milk Creek property. It's a very large property, about 20,000 acres. You can see the burn area on the western edge of the property and the small, so I think maybe 15% of the property burned, perhaps 20. The planting area is just that small purple area up in the northwest corner. That's going to be about 230 acres, I think. I don't have the chart from me anymore, but so it's a fairly small contained area. That's the area that's about 1% of this grazing lessee's lease. That area pretty easy if we were to do electric fencing, and depending on when the cattle are up there. It is a high plateau. And so the cattle would probably be up there more in the summer. And the lessees have said it's possible that they could work with electric fencing to manage that for the first 8 to 10 years. In the other 4 situations, and these 2 rightmost ones, those are not leased for grazing at all. Now, the wildfire has burned some of the fencing, but the areas around them are not grazed as well either, at least for the Young's Gulch one. The other 2, the 2 middle properties, those are the ones that will be the most challenging on how we would control grazing. Where you see the planting areas kind of scattered throughout the section, what they're doing, avoiding rocky areas, extremely steep slopes. That's something that we'd have to work with our lessees on how that might be managed. And that's part of the discussion that we would have with the grazing lessees. In the case of Silver Mountain, a lot of those areas, especially on the north, that purple area, much of that is a steep slope with very little water. The cattle often really don't go up into those areas very much anyway. And that's one of the main reasons that I'm not really bringing this to you today, is because we want to have those in-depth discussions with the lessees. I'm just going to run through some quick snapshots to give you a feel for what some of these properties look like. This is the part of Silver Mountain where most of the planting would probably occur. You can see the grasses have come back. This was taken about 5 years after the wildfire. You can see that we don't have a lot of reforestation of the trees. This is the Milk Creek property. This is part of probably the planting area. You can see that part of the trees escaped the fire. And it's up here on this upper plateau that wraps around to the north, which is to the right in this picture, where much of the planting area would occur. This is the Bluestone Park property. This is a photograph that was taken in 2015. So just several years after the fire. I don't have a more recent picture of this, but you can see the general characteristics of that site. Mule Canyon property that burned in the Cameron Peak fire. You can see that we have a lot of forests coming back, but we don't have any trees coming back. And finally, our Young Gulch property in Lander County as well. It's burned in the High Park fire. So I just wanted to hit on a high level some of the lease terms. I talked about the 40-year lease term that's required by Vera. Land Life has proposed paying in that upfront payment in year 1, that $87,000. That works out to about $87 per acre. And that payment was based on an escalating rent that I described in the cover sheet that starts out at a minimal amount and increases by 25 cents for the 40 years. And then that is changed to a single payment in year 1 based on a net present value of using 4.25%. That's the way, because Land Life will not actually be retaining ownership of the credits. The way their current project is structured, there's an outside investor paying for the entire project up front. They would be recouping the carbon credits over time. Land Life won't be in control of the credits. Our normal traditional method of getting a percentage of credit sale value really doesn't apply to the forest carbon market. And so Land Life was able to offer this upfront lease payment. And again, I mentioned that this would be a production lease coming to you and not a planning lease. And because we don't involve a regulatory body, we don't need that long lead time. Some of the other benefits that come to the land board is that investment. In the cover sheet I mentioned, it's ranged, they're estimated between $780,000 to up to $1.2 million, a private investment reforest in our state trust land. We would see a tremendous increase in the ecological restoration and improve the recreational value. A previous lessee award winner, John Twitchell of the State Forest Service, mentioned that given the state of the state's timber industry, the value of our lands as forested lands for recreational value or home sites has outpaced what we would actually have the value for timber. And so restoration would allow us to begin to recoup that value. And then again, as I've explained, we have the opportunity for future carbon credits starting at year 41. Hard to know what that value will be today, but it's nice to know that we'll have that opportunity. And finally, this project would contribute in some measure to the state's greenhouse gas goals for nature-based carbon sequestration. And so I kind of went over some of the issues involved with grazing management. I explained about the 1-year notification, how lessees would need to waive that if we were to plant in the fall of 2025. Planning lessee one-on-one meetings. Grazing would be restricted on planting sites for up to 10 years. And Land Life is also exploring in ways where the lessees are really involved with changing their management or moving their cattle in a different way. There's a possibility to pay them for that cost. It's not something that we're able to do. Colorado is a fence-out state. It's our responsibility or Land Life's responsibility to keep the cows out if they need that. But we want to work with our lessees. They're the ones that are on the ground and most able to do this. So we want to make sure that we have a successful relationship and partnership with them. And so finally, these are the 4 issues that I just listed them here for any feedback. But before I think, unless there's any pressing questions, I'd like to invite Clara Rowe up from Land Life to give a little bit of background on that company. Clara, could you come up?
Commissioner.
Sure, for everybody.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Maybe for both of you.
So what?
I
was just saying we had one question.
Commissioner.
Oh, I didn't.
Explain to me how this works, actually. When you're talking about an outside private investor, that they're looking for forest carbon credits, and who would be buying these?
Well, you know what? I'm going to actually pass that to Clara, and because she's really the one that is the expert working with the carbon market.
Okay.
So Claire, for the record, can you identify yourself and your title?
Of course, I'm Clara Rowe. I'm Director of Strategic Partnerships at Land Life. It's really nice to meet all of you and be here with you today. I am happy to dive right into your question if you'd like. So there's a few different ways. There's a few different models for how credits are generated and how they are paid for over time. The most common model that we use is that we will look at a piece of land, we will project out what carbon sequestration will look like over 40 years, and then we will work with an end buyer of those credits. So imagine a big corporation who has made a commitment to, net zero over time. They've committed to eliminating all of their carbon emissions. They know they can do so much to reduce every year, but there's a certain amount they need to offset. And so they're interested in purchasing, basically someone else, somewhere else has sequestered carbon and they're going to purchase that. And so we'll work with an end buyer of credit, someone who's looking to be able to counteract their emissions, and we'll help them understand this is how much over 40 years we estimate using, the best scientific data possible, that carbon will be sequestered over time. They will then, and we will say, and this is how much it's going to cost us to do this work. They will pay us up front for that work in exchange for the rights to the carbon in the future. So there's actually no credits that have been generated when they pay us, but they're trusting the way that we've modeled out carbon so that, they assume that over time, those credits will materialize. So we get the financing, we're able to work with landowners to get trees in the ground. And then every 5-ish years, the certification body will come in, they'll visit the site, they'll measure the trees, they'll measure the carbon, and a certain number of credits will be given based on what the sequestration occurred was. And then the company who has the rights to that, they can retire that against their commitment. So, if they emitted 5 tons and there were 5 tons of credits that were generated from this forest, then they can cancel those things out. So that's the most common way that we work. So it's a company that is interested in holding those credits themselves because of the commitment they have made around climate, and they want to retire.
So are those credits part of a federal commitment, or are they just sort of good faith
they are good faith voluntary commitments. So there are two different carbon credit markets that exist today. There's a voluntary market, and that's the one that we're talking about today, where companies, you could argue out of the goodness of their hearts, perhaps because they expect that there will be regulation in the future, perhaps because they see the threats that climate change will pose to their business, have made commitments to reducing their carbon emissions and have committed to purchase voluntary credits. There are compliance markets. They don't exist at the federal level in the US today, but California has a compliance market. There are new markets emerging in Washington and Oregon. So there are some states actually that are starting to require that.
Thank you. That's
Yeah.
very helpful.
Of course.
May I ask,
Yes.
may I ask a quick follow-up
course.
question to that? Thank you, Josie. Commissioner Clark, for the record. Thank you for that explanation. So I work in affordable housing and in the low-income housing tax credits program, which is formal and federal and things, but I'm hearing a few analogies. So there's one question I have, which is, as you say that you're projecting what credit you're going to generate. That's what we're doing when we're building a new building. We're saying this is, the investors are coming in to anticipate based on what we're saying we're going to deliver in housing, that they'll be able to offset their tax burden in the future with, actually, I can't believe I use that term because I don't see taxes as burdens. These are investments. But
It's been so ingrained.
yeah, but they are they're expecting that offset. If we don't deliver on time, or if there's something up, then we get negative adjusters, something that is offsetting it down because we didn't fully deliver all that they expected. Is there anything similar in this?
So in
scenario?
our particular case, and I have to say, every company does it slightly differently. This is one of the weird things about a nascent market. There's not a get standard around this. And we're actually one of the few companies, I think, that has been able to really convincingly show carbon projections in a way that that enables upfront finance without any security. So actually, in this case, our end buyers are taking on 100% of the risk. And that's why we are able to pay you up front. It's why we're able to pay ourselves up front. And it's why we transfer 100% of the carbon rights over to the company. Now, not all carbon project developers do it that way. Sometimes they will retain rights to carbon themselves, and then they'll be taking on more of that risk.
Thank you. You're lucky to have that for now.
Commissioner Chavez, in regard to the sequestration, obviously there's in the ground sequestration and then in the tree itself or out the ground, but in the trunk and so it's measured. Is there more on the top or below ground, above ground or below ground?
There's more above ground. It's separated into 3 pools right now. So there is above ground biomass, there is soil carbon. Well, I should say there is biomass that includes like roots, tree, branches. There is soil carbon. And then there's like what's called like coarse woody debris. So everything that kind of like falls down, sits on the ground, and eventually will also become soil carbon. So that's the way that it's divided today. The Verra protocol that we use today requires that you measure biomass. But it actually uses estimates, like an estimate, based on ecosystem of soil carbon accumulation. So that's not something that's measured. Verra is updating their protocols to require measurement around soil carbon. So that's something that will shift over time.
So studies have shown that trees are much more efficient at sequestering than pastures, let's say.
I don't know off the top of my head what the comparison of a per acre comparison of carbon sequestration would be. My intuition is yes, that forests hold more carbon. That doesn't mean that grassland carbon's not important. I think the reality is we're thinking about carbon as one way of looking at all of the benefits that ecosystems provide. And we don't want to put forests where there shouldn't be forests.
But at the same time, the photos that Mindy showed, there was pasture there. I mean, it looked like beautiful pasture, no trees. And over time, will that generate more income by letting cattle continue to be on that? But again, I think it's great. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, no. It's a good question. I think if you were to compare an acre of grassland carbon, and we can get some estimates of data to you, and what you would get from an acre of carbon in grasslands, an acre of carbon from forests.
Or in our situation, 40 years of renting or leasing to cattlemen.
Sure.
That's kind of.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
Commissioner Pro, I would just say too, it really, really depends on the context. So if you have a savanna-like grassland environment in sub-Saharan Africa and you're really managing it intensely with wildlife or with wildlife or livestock, you can really generate a lot of soil carbon, whereas at a drier, so the context matters a lot
Absolutely.
relative to
Yeah.
Yes.
the type of
that is
forest
great.
and the type of grassland and.
Commissioner Clark again, what is the risk mitigation strategy for involuntary casualties? If there's another fire in the same, within this 4-year.
Yeah, so a few ways to think about that. One is that the way that we design plantings is designed in such a way to minimize risk. So the way that we space out trees, we are always doing native species and a diverse mix of species. I have a few slides and I can talk you through one of the projects we've done here in Colorado. We're planting 7 different species there, and that's one way to mitigate risk. Management over time, that will happen in collaboration with the Colorado State Forest Service. So, that will be a collaborative effort to think about whether thinning is part of a strategy for wildfire mitigation. If there were to be another wildfire, there is a mechanism within the carbon certification world that essentially acts as insurance. So when we develop projects, we always have to set aside a percentage of what we plant that can't be credited, that kind of goes into what's called a buffer pool and acts as insurance. And so if this were to burn, and that would be called a project reversal in carbon world speak, that buffer pool gets pulled upon in order to make up for the credits that were lost. So it won't necessarily be replanted unless there's new financing that comes in. But when you're thinking overall about the integrity of this system that's supposed to be offsetting emissions, there is that insurance mechanism in place.
And if I could follow up on your point about species, has there been, or has the state, well, I'll back up. Every time we're out in the forest, I always ask this question. I'm a fan of science and technology and biotechnology. Is there an effort to modify these trees to make them resistant to bark beetle or whatever we need to do, and it'll grow you healthier trees?
Yeah, there are a number of, and perhaps Commissioner, you also have input here, but there are a number of efforts around, genetically modifying trees to sequester more carbon, to be resistant. There's a lot of debate, I would say, in the scientific community and the NGO community around the appropriateness and the ethics of doing that. The one thing that we do to think about, in this case, kind of climate proofing, future climate proofing, the plantings that we do, is when we're looking at seed selection, we will sometimes choose seeds from, slightly lower elevations to put in higher elevations, for example, to help from an adaptation perspective, and really thinking about what is the future of this forest going to look like in 50 years or 100 years? So when we are planting, we're thinking about the future in that particular way.
You can see we're all getting edgy.
I want to talk a little bit about the 40-year lease term and why that term.
Yeah.
And what is restricted in that term, because I think what commissioners will need to decide ultimately is that we're giving up maybe some known opportunities and for sure unknown opportunities in exchange for a fixed and finite payment.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we evaluate that, and how can the term be shorter? Or there's a precedent here around this lease term and about what's restricted. I note that it's not an easement,
right?
But it is a restricted lease, is what Mindy said. So can you speak to that a little bit? And
Sure.
how to balance that with the payments?
Sure. So as Mindy described, the 40 years comes from Verra, comes from the carbon certification body. Essentially, this goes back to the integrity of the larger market when we're talking about what it means to give a polluter, the right to say that their emissions were offset by someone else's sequestration. Because that's what the market is trying to do, projects that are sequestering carbon need to show that sequestration is going to happen for a certain amount of time. And because otherwise, essentially, you're, giving a license to pollute, and then it might be that forest disappears, and you've given that license to pollute without actually keeping forest standing. So that's where it comes from. And basically, 40 years has been the kind of minimum term that is determined in terms of a legal contract. And then the goal is to see that forests stand for 100 years. At the very, at a most basic level, what's being restricted is taking out the trees. So the trees need to stand for 40 years. Doesn't have to be every single tree. As Mindy says, there's possibilities for thinning. It's about 20% of biomass that can be taken out over time. But that's at the most basic level what's being restricted.
And the restriction applies only to those plantable areas. So in those circumstances, I mean, not that we're planning on developing this or putting housing up in this area, but those uses could occur where the trees are not, when those purple areas were scattered, the blue, which was unplanted areas, there is still uses. So,
and I just, because you also asked about kind of how to compare, this one-term lease payment and kind of the way that we structured it there to what you might get. I mean, we could absolutely do that in terms of comparing the grazing lease value, right? And I think when we look at that, the value of at least kind of by acre, the net present value upfront payment is higher than that grazing value over time. But as you say, there's things that you might not know. And I think that's a completely fair consideration there. And the one other thing that I just wanted to mention is that for this pilot, we're proposing this kind of fixed ground rent payment that gets paid upfront. That's something that we can work into our budget already, with the investors who have already committed to doing work in Colorado. And so it's something that we know we can, guarantee that we can pay. If we were to expand this pilot, and Mindy and I have talked about this quite a bit, I think it would be very fair for the land board to come to us and say, we'd like to work with you and your investor to talk about potentially having a share and credit revenue over time. And that's something that just requires more, people at the table and perhaps more risk on your side because of speculation around carbon prices, et cetera. But it's definitely something that we're interested and open to.
I think what I've heard you say needs to get restricted is grazing for 10 years.
Correct.
And recreation there's no restriction on that?
Or hunting.
Okay, so
Hunting is, both of those things can actually be a beneficial kind of co.
I thought you might need to keep the big guys out from eating stuff just like cattle, but okay. And Mindy, as you and I have discussed, these are, pretty discrete areas. The whole thing's 1,000 acres or something across 5 properties, and all of them are higher elevation and, no development around them. So I'm not sure that we're forsaking development opportunities. Maybe Ben would say there was some mineral opportunities or something, but there's not oil and gas. And so, as an experiment, and as a pilot project, it's pretty interesting, but I don't know how to evaluate. Did we get paid fairly? And when we look back in year 30, will we say like, wow, we undersold that, or boy, we made a killing there. What a great, so.
But that's why I like that idea of maybe sharing it over time. It's a small project, and so we'll know where the revenue is, what Amazon is paying for, or whoever company is paying for these credits. Get a better sense of the market, so future generations can.
Michigan?
Yes, so tell me more about Verra.
Yeah. So Verra is a carbon certification body. They're a nonprofit. They're headquartered here in the US. They were founded not long after the Kyoto Protocol. So they were in the very, very early days, essentially, of setting up mechanisms to measure carbon, either sequestration or avoidance of emissions associated with a whole range of different interventions, not just nature. Nature is actually just a small part of the portfolio. So you could, if you think about a giant hydro project and the ways in which that will create renewable energy, there are ways in which to generate carbon credits from that. And that dates, again, way back to the Kyoto Protocol and the very early efforts to have international agreement around carbon emissions. So what, Verra does is they create standards for measuring what carbon sequestration, or avoidance of emission will look like, and then a range of methodologies across all, again, across nature, but it can also be in infrastructure and renewables. And they, through those methodologies have then created systems where they require third-party audits, where credits get issued, they get put on their registry, they get retired. So they manage this whole voluntary system for defining what sequestration looks like and then emitting credits over time.
So are you a national or an international NGO?
Verra is an international NGO.
Mhm.
Maybe this is a nice moment, if we still have time, pull up the slides that I have, and I can
Sure.
tell you a bit more about Land Life,
Thank you.
as an organization, and some of the work we've done in Colorado specifically. But yeah, I mean, Verra is an incredibly important part of this story for us. They're the verifier that basically they set the rules for how we measure carbon. And they set the rules for how we're able to issue credits. Well, they issue the credits over time.
Thank you.
So you will have, picked up pieces of this as we've talked over time. So I don't have to stick to this perfectly, but Land Life is a nature restoration company. We were founded in 2013. And at its core, our mission is to help restore the almost 5 billion acres of degraded land around the world. Obviously, we're not going to do that alone, but help is the key word. We want to contribute to that, and we want to do that for nature, but perhaps more importantly for, the billions of us who depend on ecosystem services from nature around the world. As a company, we specialize in doing restoration in temperate climates. So while you'll hear a lot of reforestation, especially reforestation for carbon that's happening in the global south and the tropics, which is incredibly needed, and trees grow fast. We've carved out a niche working in places where trees often grow a bit slower, where there's less rainfall some of the time. And that's really where we've specialized. And we actually started out funding our work through government grants, through philanthropy, but in the last 5 years moved toward the voluntary carbon market as a way to bring private sector finance into doing this nature restoration work that we've been doing from the beginning. Is this how I made this forward? So that's it. Ooh, it worked. So today, 10 years later, we're about 75 people across 5 offices around the world. Our headquarters are actually in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. But our biggest operational hubs, like where we're actually doing reforestation work, are here in North America, in Spain and Portugal, and in Australia. And that's quite a broad geographic spread, but again, climatically, there's some key things that are shared
Enlightened
there.
places.
What?
Enlightened places.
They've certainly been really positive places for us to work. We've implemented about 124 projects over those 10 years, which total 27,000 acres of restoration. And now that we're funding that work through the voluntary carbon market, we're working with about 50 different clients. So those are, again, end buyers of carbon credits, who mostly are looking to buy credits to retire against their net zero commitments. All right, so Colorado. We began working in Colorado in 2021 with a pilot in the Spring Creek fire footprint. And we really came to Colorado for a combination of reasons. One is the opportunity for impact. Unfortunately, I don't need to tell all of you that Colorado has suffered from quite a few wildfires in recent decades and recent years, 2020 being a particularly difficult year. It also, which means that there's opportunity for restoration and need for restoration. The climate here in Colorado meets again the kind of areas that we've specialized in. And ultimately, we were lucky to find really strong partners. I think that, you can meet all of the right technical requirements, but if you don't actually have people that want to work with you and that you can work with, it's not going to work. So we started working with private landowners in Colorado, many of whom actually were already engaged in some way with the Colorado State Forest Service or the US Forest Service around watershed management and land management practices. So after that first year in 2021, over the last 4 years, we've expanded our work across the state to restore over 6,400 acres, planting 1.6 million trees. Actually, almost 1 million of those were planted this fall. So you can see kind of year over year, we've grown quite a lot. It was a whirlwind fall, a whirlwind planting season. We work with local planting partners here. We work with Ecoculture to do the big planting that we did this year. And so it's been really incredible to see the way that is scaled. And as we've grown our work, we've continued to find really incredible partners across the state to support the work that we're doing. So, for example, we've developed an internship program with Adams State University. So we have students who will come out and work with us. We're working with them to co-design right now a project that will help us measure our water quality impact. We know we're having carbon impact, we know we're having wildlife impact, but we're not actually able to say what is that water benefit that we're having. So that's been a really fruitful collaboration. We have done collaborations around seed collection with the Apache and Navajo nations, and work with One Canopy, who are a local nursery here. So that has really been a kind of key part of our ability to expand. And we're really proud that in addition to delivering ecological benefits, of course, planting trees means that you can improve habitat for biodiversity, you can control erosion, you can improve water quality, but also a range of social benefits, recreation and educational opportunities, engaging communities, creating jobs, increasing land value. So for us, kind of seeing that as a package has been really important. So Mindy's already outlined to you kind of how we work and the projects. And so I thought actually the best thing that I could do is to take you into one project and that we've worked on specifically. And so I want to take you to Grand County, to the Sea Lazy U Ranch, where we just finished in October, I believe, over 8 days. It was like kind of this crazy whirlwind, 8 days. Planted 180,000 seedlings on about 550 acres of land. And yeah, you can see it's a beautiful property. It's a huge property. They were impacted by the East Troublesome Fire in 2020. So had a big portion of forest land that was burned. I've thrown a bunch of numbers at you in terms of number of trees and acres. And I actually sometimes think that numbers can take away from some of the deeper things that are required to make these projects work. And so I wanted to talk about 4 sets of things that are really characteristics of our work here at Sea Lazy U, but also of the way that we work in general at Land Life. So one is the way in which we use science and technology to enable efficient project design and implementation. The second is how we do integrated land use planning when we're working to design reforestation efforts to ensure really that we're meeting landowner needs and delivering a suite of benefits. And then of course, collaboration and transparency are really key across all stages of our project. And we're particularly important here with Sea Lazy U. So I'm just going to take you through each one of those quickly. When we think about the science and technology piece, we really embed these things throughout the core of our work. Early on, we use remote sensing in order to be able to assess site suitability and really inform and ensure that when we go to the ground, which of course we always have to do, that we go to the right places, that we're looking for the right things. You can see there one of our operation managers, Jonah, flying a drone. So we will then use that kind of technology in the field as well. Science informs the way that we're designing optimal planting. So in this particular site at Sea Lazy U, we planted 7 different native species. And we did that also in consultation with a range of stakeholders, which I'll talk about. And then science and technology is also key to our ability to model out, as I've talked about, what carbon sequestration will look like over time with the specific mix of trees we're going to plant. And that's what allows us to build trust with buyers and secure upfront finance and really make sure that we can implement this work. The land use planning piece is particularly important to me. You can see in dark green the areas that were planted in Sea Lazy U. You can see the kind of precision with which those were outlined. And we came to this particular planting design not only because of what was eligible from a reforestation and a carbon credit generation perspective, but really working with the larger land use strategy that the Sealy's Lazy U Ranch has. This is a place where grazing is incredibly important. The vast majority of the ranch is being, left for grazing. And we worked closely with the ranchers here to really figure out where do they want forest and why, and how does that interact with the other things that are important to them on their property. So that's, again, kind of core to how we think about doing good reforestation work. Trees aren't going to stay somewhere if people don't want them to stay there. Collaboration is obviously key throughout any process, and especially when it involves land, it's really key. And it usually involves collaboration beyond a specific landowner. So in this case, for example, TNC is an easement holder on Sea Lazy U. And so we coordinated really closely with TNC to make sure that we were meeting the conservation goals within the easement context as we were designing this project. They reviewed our restoration plan, they reviewed our species mix. It was a really key part of what we were building. This is a photo from a site visit that we did just kind of for community members after the planting this fall. And then transparency, key throughout this process, just in terms of making sure that everyone involved understands what's happening and why. And what I've shown here is a dashboard that we give all landowners access to post-planting, so that not only can they see what's happening on the ground, sometimes these are huge properties, but that they can also see everything that we might be seeing from space with the best satellite imagery. Drone photos will get stored there. So then that's something that landowners are able to see over time. So this is, as I say, important for this particular case in Colorado, but pretty characteristic of how we work across the board. And I just wanted to end by saying, there are a lot of reasons that we're really excited about the potential to expand the way that we partner in Colorado, from private landowners to working with you. Mindy's already showed you this map that shows the overlap of wildfires and state land or land. I'm really glad that there's not more areas that you're impacted, but of course there is impact. So for us, one of the most exciting possibilities of a collaboration is the fact that there is the potential to have big impact and to scale. And you are, a sophisticated landowner who knows what it means to think about this kind of engagement with us. And that's a really exciting place to be. You bring to the table partners like the Colorado State Forest Service, and that's an incredibly exciting partnership for us as we think about what it looks like to build good, strong, resilient forests, with local experts on this. And then finally, we see huge mission alignment when we think about the possibility that a lease payment that we make would go to support public education in the state. That means that we're able to have social impact in addition to the environmental impact that we have. That's really important to us. It's really important to the people paying for this project a lot of the time. And the way that we think about long-term stewardship mirrors a lot of what I've heard about the way that you think about land stewardship. And so having that mission alignment is really important. And I think the final thing I'll end on is just to say that as we're thinking about how we want to show up in Colorado long-term, it's really about helping to build a reforestation industry and build a reforestation infrastructure. That means predictability for nurseries. It means knowing that seed collection will happen. It means over time, all of those things become more efficient. And that means kind of predictability. So thinking about the ways that we can engage a broader ecosystem to make that happen and to grow that in a place where we know there's high need is something that's really exciting. So thank you. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Any further questions?
Real quickly, you mentioned infrastructure on the greenhouses. Is that are they making enough trees these days, or what's their capacity, or do we need more greenhouses?
There are very few, there's very little local nursery capacity in Colorado. Most of the seedlings that we purchase right now, we collect seeds in Colorado, and then they go to Oregon to nurseries to be grown. And then we drive them back in trucks. So, and we have worked and we, we'll place a seedling order, we hope of about 100,000 seedlings with a local nursery here next year. But there hasn't been a consistent enough demand to support nursery infrastructure. And that's what we see also with, with contractor infrastructure, with every element of the supply chain that's required to make reforestation happen. It requires predictability, and that requires knowing like, oh, not just next year, but 2 years, 3 years from now, we're going to continue to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What's the minimum number of acres we could do? If there was a lessee that couldn't participate for some reason or another, or a parcel that had to drop out.
So what we've proposed for the lease payment is ultimately a payment per acre, not based on a total payment. So we can adjust based on that. I'm scared to give you a minimum number. I don't know.
Well, there's somewhere where there's a
we'd have to
critical,
talk-
we need a critical mass. So.
Yeah, a
Okay.
few hundred acre, like we usually don't work with less than a few hundred acres at a
Got it.
time.
And it doesn't, to follow on that, it doesn't sound like, the timing would allow in this situation, but you could go beyond 1,000 acres. I mean, it's sort of like whatever, you're trying to package the demand you have for the credits, the land that's available,
The
and
seedling
the
order.
timing altogether,
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
And you did answer one of the question I hadn't asked yet about the opportunities for expansion, should we all be satisfied with a project
Yes.
like this, that there would be logical ways to expand it. And I would just add, for my fellow commissioners too, I am not the science part of the Nature Conservancy, as you know, but in any reforestation effort, the infrastructure is always, and the growing of the plant material is always the bottleneck. I mean, it's really huge. So I hadn't really thought about the benefits of a concerted intentional investment
Yes.
in that infrastructure for the state, for reforestation generally.
Yes.
So may I see if there's any comments from the public before we?
You can, we don't normally on info items.
On an info item, okay,
Certainly your
good.
discretion.
No, then I don't think so today.
Okay.
I think Mindy asked us like for those 4 points about our thoughts.
Right, right. So does anyone have any further thoughts on that? I'm cognizant of the time, so I'm wondering if we have.
Well, I'll just say first, I think this is an exciting project and I think it would be a wonderful thing for the landlord to be involved with, and commend you for taking it this far. On the 4 points you asked about, we always struggle with how long a lease should be. And so I'm sure my colleagues will want to talk more about that. The other things with site selection, change in the grazing management and potential lease revenue, I think we'll have a little conversation about that, but generally, I think this sounds like you're on target. And, I mean, Sea Lazy U isn't sort of a, just a populist hangout. You have a very sophisticated and expensive property that you're working with.
I would also offer that we do take seriously this is my point of view, that the length of term and the foregone opportunities. I think a couple of things on that in favor of what I think is a creative new, not only revenue generator, but an asset enhancement strategy with somebody else's time and money and effort. There's virtually no risk to us other than the potential foregone opportunity. The size and structure of the parcels relative to our overall portfolio suggest again that perhaps there's an issue, but really from the percentage of this to the whole portfolio, it seems that it really flips in the balance of trying this, gaining the benefits to the experience and the benefits of the parcels, and contributing towards sort of a larger reforestation strategy that we too will benefit from over time. So like you, Josie, I see that there's a lot of benefit here. And my other question I didn't ask, which you answered, is it appears that there would be room for some more creative revenue structuring for risk reward sharing, contingent payments in the future above market expectations, things like that. So those could be interesting as well.
I agree.
No one else? Well, thank you very much, Mindy. Thank you for a thoughtful presentation that really isolated and hit on the issues that we need to think about through the presentation. And thank you very much for your comments and answering all our questions in your presentation. It was very enlightening.
Thank you very much, Commissioners.
Thank you.
Break for a minute. Or you got to just use restroom.
All right, 3 minutes and counting.
That's plenty.
5 minutes, 5-minute break.
Maybe for you.
It is nothing you said.
It's just
Yeah.
weird.
This happens that way.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Mal LaFontaine, the Acquisition Disposition Manager. And I have with me today Ben Teschner, the Solid Minerals Manager. The item before you is kind of two-part. One is to provide a quick update on the REPI program. And the second part is to ask for a $65,000 IND authorization to obtain a minerals appraisal at the Table Mountain property. And we'll dive into that shortly. Just a historic tidbit. This is a aerial picture of Fort Carson back in the day, which a lot of REPI is certainly centered around. As a historical point of interest, the State Land Board actually used to own about a third of the land underlying the current footprint of the installation and disposed of it in a series of exchanges over time. Okay, this is a map that you all are probably tired of seeing at this point, but certainly familiar with. It kind of gives us a succinct overview of REPI. REPI again is the Readiness and Environmental Protection Integration Program, which is a funding source through the Department of Defense that allows for installations to acquire conservation easements or fee lands around their installations to enable the continuity of their operations and training. So as land uses have changed over time around the installations, it's become increasingly important for the military to protect those lands. There's a kind of a natural nexus with the conservation community in the conservation and protection of those same lands. And as it happens, the State Land Board is a large owner of a lot of those lands as well. So just for orientation purposes, on this map, you have Colorado Springs here, the Air Force Academy up here, Schriever Space Force Base, and then Fort Carson here. The REPI program was approved by the State Land Board in 2023. It involves 6 parcels. Those are highlighted here in red. So you have Bohart, Big Springs, Edison, the lands adjacent to Schriever, Aiken Canyon, and Table Mountain. And it allows for the sale of purchase options that are subject to DoD compliant restrictions. For phase takedowns that would allow for this conservation of these lands over time. They're still subject to the State Land Board's standard reservations, which are primarily minerals, pore space, and so on. And each property that we dispose of requires a separate board approval process. So also in 2023, the board approved the disposal of the Bohart Ranch. We noticed that TPL was the successful bidder of the purchase option, and they subsequently took down the first phase of the property, which was about 11,900 acres, in October of last year. They're working on their second phase, which will likely close in the first half of next year, which will be about another 12,000 acres. So this property was relatively straightforward, as while it's on the kind of horizon of development, it's not as impacted or encroached upon by today's development. And agriculture and potentially holding the property for future development is kind of the highest and best use today. There aren't significant mineral resources here that are being extracted and monetized today. However, there is potentially value in the pore space, which we reserved, and that's evidenced by a planning lease that's actually on the southern boundary of Bohart that went into effect, I think, last year. The next property that our conservation partners have been working to arrange their partner funding on is Table Mountain. And here's kind of a neat picture that shows that's taken up from Table Mountain, and you can see a military operation, so an overflight operation in the background, and then in the foreground, some surface disturbance from some mining operations. Over the past year, we have attended numerous meetings and on-sites with interested stakeholders, including reps from the conservation partners, DoD, CPW, DNR, the Forest Service, and others, and continue to evaluate what a disposal might look like from the SLB perspective of Table Mountain. Part of that process was obtaining an appraisal, which we did over the summer as a certified intended user. Upon review of that appraisal, staff had some significant concerns that we attempted to address with the appraiser. Those are detailed more specifically in the cover sheet, but ultimately staff rejected the appraisal and has set out to obtain a second surface appraisal and now a mineral appraisal so we can understand the value of the minerals here, which is the second part of this presentation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ben to talk some of the mineral details of the property.
All right. For the record, Commissioners, this is Ben Teschner, the Solid Minerals Manager. And as Matt alluded to, unlike Bohart and some of the other properties we're looking at in this program, the Table Mountain property has significant mineral assets underlying the surface, and including 2 current active mining leases that generate significant revenue. The first one you're looking at here is the GCC gypsum lease. And gypsum is this sort of fibrous white mineral that is used as a binding agent in cement. And so GCC, who is also, we visited the GCC cement plant in Pueblo. GCC mines gypsum from the Table Mountain property, trucks it to Pueblo, and it goes into the cement that is made on that other State Land Board lease as well. The second lease is this one here, which I believe some board members have visited at least at one time in the past. This is formerly known as the TZAC Table Mountain Core. It was recently purchased by Wholesome, which is one of the largest construction materials producers in the world. And they have plans to dramatically expand this operation. This is primarily for stone, crushed stone, boulders, and those types of materials. If you look at sort of a map of the property, the area in purple, ringed in purple, is the proposed, or at least the contemplated disposal area. And importantly, for the purposes of this discussion, the two mining leases are excluded from that surface disposal area as currently contemplated. However, both and both operators have indicated to staff that they believe they have about 8 years worth of mine life left in the current lease areas. Both of these operators separately have applied to expand their lease areas to lengthen their mine life into the area that is currently proposed for surface disposal. As contemplated, there is an assumption that if we dispose of the surface, we would effectively be stranding the mineral resources underneath that surface, even though we would be preserving them. And so part of the discussions that we're having with the partners in this would be for a non-development agreement of some type, and have the state board be compensated for that. The primary reason we are asking for this IND request is because we want to understand the value of these minerals sitting underneath the proposed disposal area to inform in part the discussions about what value we should place on that non-development agreement. So just as a little background, the two producing leases on the site in the last fiscal year, GCC Gypsum produced generated about $270,000 in revenue to the land board, almost all royalties. Staff project GCC needs about 75,000 tons of gypsum a year to feed the cement plant. And we anticipate that production level would basically remain the same for the next while, although these numbers are predicated on the ability to expand into beyond the current lease area. So assuming that would be the case, staff project that we would see that value rise to just shy of $500,000 a year based on the royalty rate increases that are part of the lease and pegged to the producer's price index for cement. The Wholesome lease is slightly different because this lease has just changed hands and because of who it has changed hands to. We anticipate, based on Wholesome's plans, that production at this site will dramatically increase over the next few years. And by early 2030s, be generating somewhere in the neighborhood of $750,000 per year. And so these are sort of the first line, the 377 is that's a real number that was from fiscal year 2023-24, and the following ones are these projections by staff. So we've reached out to 7 mineral appraisers. 2 responded with bids, and we have the two bids to present to you as shown here. Staff are recommending that we go with the lower price of the 2 bids by mineral valuation specialists, and our evaluation of the bids is that the quality and the expected work product is very similar between the 2 firms.
Bill, I'm here. Ben.
Yes.
Commissioner Fogle, just curious why the other 5 declined to bid. Do you feel it was political or other issues, or was it just they were too busy?
I got, well, a handful of things. I got a lot of we are very busy. We could do this 3 or 4 months from now, and that was, our timeline is, I think, a little tighter than that. I did not get a sense of political
Okay.
reasons, but there is a lot of, I think there's a lot of work in this space right now, and clearly, I think the demand for this. Oh, I guess I'll add one more thing that, a mineral appraisal is slightly different than a surface appraisal in the sense that it's a little bit, there's a lot more technical details that need to be compiled in order to show that resources exist, that they can be extracted at a profit, so on and so forth. And so there's a fair amount of engineering that actually goes in behind these things too, if high level engineering. It's a little more complicated than looking around and, trying to get 5 different comps or, whatever the case may be. It's a little different sort of type of analysis. So there are more people kind of involved in this type of appraisal, I think, than maybe your typical surface appraisal, certainly.
And the appraisal will cover expansion, also the existing quarry and expansion.
Great question. So we have requested that the appraisal cover not the areas that are currently leased, because as currently contemplated, we would be holding on to that surface and therefore realizing whatever the value is from that area. So we've asked for this appraisal to cover everything else. So those proposed expansion areas and the areas that are currently not leased and not, we don't have applications for expansion at this point.
So would they draw out lines of where there's minerals in the future? Like, okay, it stops. You can only go another quarter mile and there's nothing else after that.
Yeah. So, we're not going to be out there drilling holes or sampling, but certainly relying on geologic maps as they are created in, mostly in the public space, relying on our past production and reasonable sort of anticipation of what we would expect going forward. Basically they're going to go in and look at, our staff projections and take a look and say, this is actually reasonable, or do we think something different? So, that's what we're asking them to dive into. So based on the information we've presented you, we are requesting that you authorize $65,000 in I&D funds for us to get this appraisal and take that information and come back to you in the future with that and many other things.
A meeting discussion for sure in the future. Commissioners, any questions? May I have a motion?
This is Commissioner Chavez. I move to approve the I&D request for the REPI update in Table Mountain as described in the board package.
Second. Thank you, Commissioner Clark.
Oh, sorry.
Do we want to see if there's any public comment before we vote?
Yep, folks listening along online, use the raise hand button if you'd like to make a comment to the board on this item alone. No hands raised.
Right, with motion in a second, now we have a vote. Commissioner Chavez?
Yes.
Commissioner Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr.
Yes.
Chair votes yes, so motion carries 5-0. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Second, keep that forward. You with me?
Didn't give him a warning.
Surprise, I'm here. We need to look at least once on the screen, but
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Wilbur Strickert, Northeast District Manager. And today I have presented to you on our irrigation farm in Northeast Colorado, with the Curious Lease Permit System and I&D fund request. So this lease is located in Yuma County, right over here, almost on the state line, kind of north of Ray and Laird. The tour that we did earlier in the year, we kind of drove past the property, or we were in the area, I guess you could say, of the property. One thing I do want to point out is that that tour was for the kind of a water tour of the area that's being dried up in the dry up zone and stuff. I want to make that clear that that area is down in this part of Yuma County. That is not this area. This is the well pumping filled area that we toured. So zooming in on that property here, got a map of our lease here that Decure's leased from us. And this is, as you can see, mostly pivots in this area. So we're going to go backwards in order here, but 510, 59, 58, and 55 are all wells that we're proposing today that we would like to do some repairs on. 5.2 and 5.3 are the pivots that we're proposing today, and there's kind of the pink around them. This is also a well that we propose to be some repairs, and then 5.7 is on repairs to a pivot. We can come back to that map if you guys need to. So pivots on this particular farm are somewhere between 40 to 50 years old, the ones that we're looking at replacing, and the ones you guys did repairs on a few years ago. And so the useful life is approximately 30 years. And you can do repairs on those like we did on the last three and extend their life by about 10 years. So today we're looking at replacement of the 5.2 and 5.3. These are some older pivots. I mean, they're definitely not 40 to 50 years old. They're steel framed. They're getting pretty rusty, pretty thin on those systems. And then on 5.7, we're looking at the alignment system. And I got a picture here. This is kind of the alignment system here. It's just a little box that sets right in the middle of each span. And this little rubber is a split between the two spans there so it can flex. And it's this little box right here. And this has this rod you can see that goes out this direction, connects to this span. The box sits on this span, and it's all electronics in there. And as that moved, that rod kind of twists and it controls a little lever inside of there. And if those stick or those fail and don't turn it off, one span keeps going, and then you have this it just walks and can smash onto itself. It has a lot more damage than if it works like it's supposed to and just keeps moving along the field. So the proposal that I have for this is just the pivot part here is, so 5.2 is approximately $80,000 to replace that pivot. 5.3 is about $61,000. And then 5.7 to do the repairs of the alignment system is about $5,300. So the total, with the 50% contingency in there, a total of about $168,000 to repair those pivots. Moving into the well side of things. So these wells are anywhere from 47 to 54 years old. It's when they were drilled. There's still a lot of water in those wells. This is a deep part of the aquifer here. So there's a lot of water in those. The land board acquired this in 1996, and our records don't show that we've ever worked on these 5 wells. We've never pulled them or anything since we bought these. The pump life is approximately somewhere, depending on the water quality and so forth, somewhere around 20 years, and you should pull them up, rework those pumps. The nozzle life on the pivots, and this includes the ones that were put up about 10 years ago, it's about 10 years that the nozzle lasts. So at every 10 years, you kind of got to look at replacing those. And that also has to do with water quality. We're lucky in Yuma County, this is pretty good water, so our life is longer. So we get about 10 years out of them. Some areas, they only get like 3 to 5 years. So we're very, very fortunate in that part. Dropping into this, I got a kind of an image here of a pump if you guys are unfamiliar how this works. So they'll drill a well, and this is about 16 inches hole is what it is. And they drill that down, and these wells are in the 200 to 300 foot deep here. So they'll drill this, and then they put in the pipe. The perforated pipe is down here, and they get into the water level. So what we have here is the motor on the top. there's a shaft that comes out of the bottom of this and spins a turbine that just kind of like suck the water up. So in order to get to these pumps, they got to pull all of this out of the hole. They got to pull out 180 foot of pipe to get to these, what they call the bowls here. And all it is a big old, about 8 inches around. It's a cast iron piece and it just has a turbine in there that spins from a rod that comes down. And those are lubricated with oil that goes down and lubricates those, but just over time, those spinning down in there just it just wears out over time. Is there any questions on that pump side of things there? Okay.
Can I just ask what
Yes.
reworking a pump means? Like,
So-
that's just a term and not.
Yes, so reworking this pump, they would pull all this out of the hole. They would take these bowls loose, all those spinning pieces, they would go through every single one of those, replace them if they're completely wore out, or they would just repair what's there. So sometimes it could be just replacing bushings in there. Sometimes it could be just a whole replacement of the entire turbine. There will be, Justin probably knows this better than me, there'll be approximately about 5 or 6 of those on these wells. And they're all just right in a row. And that causes enough suction with the pump to suck up the water out of that hole. So, does that answer your question? Okay. So moving into the nozzle type of thing, these are actually, I put them in with the well side of things because when you rework a well and fix a well, you kind of just need to re-nozzle your system as well because it affects your water flow and your nozzles are set by the amount of gallons that your well pumps. So that's why that's why I put them in with the well side of things. So here's the nozzle here in this top piece here, or maybe this side of the image might be a little better. This top piece here, this black piece with the blue on it, this is the regulator. These all are at they allow a certain pressure and ours are about 10 PSI. And so they'll set the pressure. And if those are off or they fail, you got higher pressure on those, which has caused your nozzles to break, fall off, and then you just got a stream of water squirting out. But if you have enough of those fail, it starts making the pump not work like it's supposed to because you're pumping more water. You're not getting enough pressure. Your system's not pressurizing to the right pressure. And so then nothing works right. You get this very uneven crop. You can see the corn will be short in areas, taller in others. It makes it very uneven across the field. So this piece right here is the actual nozzle. These are replaced as they are needed to. So these things just break and wear out. These are something that our lessee replaces as they need to. They get plugged up for whatever reason with sand or bugs or whatever plugs these up. So those are replaced, but those are what sets your gallons per minute, are those little piece there. And then this bottom piece is just the pad, and that water hits that and just sprays. There's several different styles of them. This is just the image that I found that worked for what I was doing today, but there's several different ones. Some of those spin, some of them are just splat and spray. So the proposal that I got for the well side of things is 5.2 is about 21,000 and 5.8 is about 26, 5.9 is about 26, and 5.10 is about 26. We'll go back to 5.5 because that's kind of the outlier there. You guys are looking at that. Why is that $86,000? So 5.5, there's a lot of water in that area that's right next to the other wells. The problem with 5.5 is that it has sanded in. There's a lot of sand in that hole. There's about 100 foot of sand that has somehow came into that well. So when we tried to lower the pump on that, when we asked permission for that, I think it's been about 5 years ago, they couldn't lower the pump. It would not go down the hole any farther. So they believe it's sand blocking. That doesn't mean the well isn't any good. They shot the worst case scenario of drilling a new well in case they cannot repair it. So what they do to repair it is they have to get the sand out of the well. And so they pretty much, it's called sand bucketing it. They drop a great big, pretty much pipe down the well, drop it in, and then it has a flapper on the bottom of that pipe that just drops into the sand. Then when they go to pull it up, that flapper closes and they pull out sand each time they do it. 100 foot of sand is a lot of sand to pull out of a well. So the plan is to run a camera down the well, figure out whether it has a hole in a casing or if it's just came in through the perforations on the pipe. So it's kind of an unknown situation at this point, but that's why that one is much, much higher than the others.
May I display more of my ignorance here, but I'm just curious. 5.2, location 5.2, why would it be that it has the deepest well depth, but one of the lowest pump depths?
So it's It just kind of depends on where the static water level is and when you pump on the water, how far the water goes down and all those sort of things. Justin probably explained this better than me. There's a static water level, which is where your water is all the time. And then there's a pumping water level when you pump, how far the water goes down. And I'm not the person that sets all this, but our guys at Quality, Gene, he's the one that figures all that out for what they need to be and where it's pulling down when they pump it and everything.
Okay.
And so that's kind of what sets the depth, or the pump depth. The well depth is drilled to what they call blue shell, and that's kind of the bottom of the water. That's kind of the bedrock where they stop at, where it's going to be good, fresh, clean water is the kind of the idea. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's good. So we'll have what's called drawdown, I think is what Wilbur was describing. And so when a pump turns on, the aquifer level will decrease. And so in this particular well, 5.2, I don't know, but I would have to take a guess that it probably doesn't have a lot of drawdown. It has a lot of capacity because it's deeper. It's a good.
But they're able to pump from that level and not have.
Yeah. So there's more capacity to drop the pump down if we need to, but it must not have enough drawdown to justify it.
Okay.
So
The other thing is how much water's coming in through the perforations in your pipe, on how quickly it comes in, how many gallons per minute you're pumping out. So a lot of factors to that depth.
Okay.
So
Thank you. Yeah,
Yes.
just wanted to understand the variables that go into that. Thank you.
Great. Now I'm wondering, how much more do we have on this? Oh.
like how many more
Slides, like.
Because we gotta be a
How we do it, like, can we? This has been really interesting. And sorry, I don't got all the time around and a follow-up session for others who want to dig deeper, no pun intended, into the wells.
So staff's recommendation is using up to $385,000 of I&D funds to replace 2 pivots, repair the one, rework the well, and re-nozzle the pivots so the wells were reworking. And so that was my last slide. So are there any other questions?
And just confirm what you said, and that is, there's a lot of money, seems like it needs to be spent, and we're not afraid of running out of water on this during the next 20 or 30 years.
This is the deepest part of the field, so
Okay.
I think we should be
Wanted
good
to-
for a while.
All righty, any other questions, elaborations? Right, public comment.
Folks listening along online, if you'd like to make a comment on this item, raise that hand. No hands raised.
Okay, fine. May we have a motion, please?
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve the I&D request for the Cure Brother irrigation improvements as described in our board packet.
Thank you, Dr. Heath. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Scanlon. May we have a vote? Mr. Chavez?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Scanlon?
Yes.
Myself votes yes. Great. Thank you very much. Walter.
Commissioners.
Most interesting.
Right, no slides, so
Yay.
I understand I'm the only thing between us and the remainder of events today. Good morning, Commissioners. Andy Bissett for the Transactions and Record Services team. I'm here this morning not to ask for I&D money, but rather to present on behalf of all business lines who use and reference the permits policy, which is up for its 3-year review as part of our regular 3-year review cycle. Overall, the policy has been working since it was last reviewed in May of 2021. And so the red lines you see are not because the policy isn't working, but rather are driven by the policy modifications made to the solid minerals development policy in May of this year. Those modifications included the addition of a planning and exploration lease type and detailed much of the terms that staff is in turn suggesting removal of in the permits policy. Additionally, I make note that staff's recommending the addition of academic institutions to provision 2B3 as they at times conduct research on trust lands that extends beyond 1 year. The Colorado Geological Survey, for example, through the School of Mines, produces research information for free into the public domain with low to zero impact on the law. Those are the points I wanted to highlight for you. Happy to take any questions, but staff recommends approval of the proposed modifications to the permit policy 300-007.
Thank you, Andy. Any questions? Any public waiting to weigh in on this, Nick?
Well, we want to acknowledge we did receive the written comment on this item
Right.
specifically. I'm sorry if you said that, I was reading something. So folks listening online needed to make a comment to the board on this item. Use your raise hand. No hands.
Okay, great. Do we have a motion, please?
This is Commissioner Chavez, I move we approve the policy review for permits 300-007 as described in the board package.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Clark. Commissioner Chavez, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Lee?
Yes.
Clark?
Did we get, sorry, we did do public comment? Okay, sorry. Yes.
And Commissioner Scanlon?
Yes.
The chair votes yes. Thank you, Andy.
Moving along to
Yeah,
the
you
next
have-
item. All
I
right,
believe.
we're leasing agenda. So again, Andy was set for the transactions and related services team. We have a short board leasing agenda for you this month. Only 3 items, 2 of which are competitive agriculture bids. There's one there for grazing and one there for dry farm. In addition, we have 1 new lease for recreation. So staff recommends approval of the December 2024 board leasing agenda. There are no questions.
Any public comment?
Folks listening along, use the raise hand feature if you'd like to make a comment on this item, the board leasing agenda for December. Not seeing any hands raised.
Okay, motion please. Commissioner Scanlon?
I move that the board approve the December 2024 board leasing agenda as presented in our package. Second.
Commissioner Heath, thank you. Commissioner Chavez?
Yes.
Commissioner Heath?
Yes.
Commissioner Clark?
Yes.
Commissioner Scanlon? Yes. Chair votes yes. Thank you. Okay. Well, the minutes, may I ask if anybody has any comments, modifications to those? Hearing none, the minutes are approved by acclamation. And I believe that brings the December meeting to a close.
Commissioners, for January, we blocked out 2 days. We'll only need 1 following our past patterns. I've assumed Wednesday, the 15th. And so more details follow. Right now, that looks like a pretty short agenda, so it may just be virtual. If it's going to be less than a half-day material, we'll do it on Zoom, and that's the way it's looking right this minute. So I'll ask Rachel to make the adjustments to your calendar. You get your Thursday back, perhaps after Wednesday. So, and does everyone know where we're going? 8th in Pennsylvania, we have Grand Humphreys Mansion. It's about a 5-block walk for staff, commissioners. You're welcome to drive.
Josie,
Think
I'm
you're
gonna
gonna drive?
take you.
Okay.
And I unfortunately will not be able to attend this year. That happens to me every December.
Yeah.
And then since Rachel went over there early, where can we read our?
You'll get the name, we'll pass them on. Thanks.
Close the meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Are you coming over